This is episode 144 of Decoding Fox News, and I'm your host, Juliet Jeske. Each week, I watch and analyze a whole heck of a lot of Fox News, and then break it down. I watch all the Fox News you'd never want to. So let's get into it. Last week was a doozy in a bunch of terrible ways. Terrorist attack in New Orleans was absolutely devastating. That's going to be the sole focus of this podcast, but it's going to be how Fox covered it. There were other stories last week, but they're just not really relevant compared to this major story. And I also want to say very quickly, I went over 22 hours of Fox. I had to pick up a bunch of extra stuff because of this, because I really wanted to see how the network handled it, which was terribly, absolutely terribly, as expected, but worse than I expected, to be quite frank. But because I'm going to go through this, and there's a lot of clips, I want to get a couple things out of the way before we get into it, because I don't want to break this up. So I just want to say, if you're wondering who pays for Decoding Fox News, who is my boss, that would be the listeners of this podcast and the readers of my Substack newsletter who are paid subscribers and paid supporters. How can you become a paid subscriber? You can go to Substack for Decoding Fox News, and subscriptions start at only $5 a month, $55 for the year, and then there's an extra bonus one for $168 if you want to be a founding member. Also on Patreon, I'm kind of a socialist in that I have multiple levels, but whatever you can give is great a month. Everybody gets the same stuff. I do that because it's just so difficult to make extra stuff for different tiers, and I'm always behind schedule with this project. I'm always working. So thank you so much if you're a Patreon supporter. I greatly appreciate it. So here's our headline: How Fox News Used the New Orleans Terrorist Attack to Spread Hatred Towards Immigrants. This is a condensed overview of 22 hours of Fox News for the week ending January 5th, 2025. Last week, the folks at Fox completely botched a breaking story about a terrorist attack in the early morning of New Year's Day. The clips tell the story much better than I can, so this podcast will be as bare bones as possible so I can show through the Fox News correspondent's own words how the network took a terrorist attack and weaponized it against undocumented immigrants. The tragic event that occurred on January 1st resulted in the loss of 14 lives, while dozens were injured and an untold number of people will live with the trauma of witnessing the carnage or narrowly escaping harm. Shows I covered on Fox last week: Fox and Friends, All 3 Hours on New Year's Day, The Five, The Ingram Angle, Who Can Forget, New Year's Eve Special, A New Year with Kat Timpf and Tyrus, Jimmy Fallon New Year's Eve Special, and Fox News Live, 3 hours on New Year's Day. So this first clip was a video that I made for social media. It got picked up by Joy Ann Reid and was featured on TikTok. And it's basically the mistake that Fox News made, that both correspondents and anchors, along with guests who didn't know any better because they were going by what Fox had just reported on, all of this information is incorrect. And you're going to hear something about a truck passing through Eagle Pass, Texas. That is incorrect information. I just want to preface that before I play it. Here's the clip.
This person came through Eagle Pass, Texas 2 days ago.
The vehicle potentially was traced to crossing at Eagle Pass, Texas.
Suspect drove a truck with a Texas license plate that came through Eagle Pass, Texas.
Hearing that the vehicle was traced to coming across from Mexico into the United States at Eagle Pass, Texas 2 days ago. To be sure, license plate was picked up by a reader at a border crossing. This is that it was picked up crossing at that border station at Eagle Pass, Texas 2 days ago. But as far as this Eagle Pass, Texas situation is concerned,
plate reader at Eagle Pass sees this car coming in from Mexico. So the weapon was that truck came across the border.
We do know that the vehicle has a Texas plate. It crossed through Eagle Pass, Texas, crossed the border 2 days ago.
Sources tell Fox that the suspect was driving a truck with Texas plates. That vehicle is said to have come through our border in Eagle Pass 2 days ago.
Even drove it right through Eagle Pass, Texas, but supposedly that truck came in 2 days ago.
Truck came across from Mexico into the United States.
The Texas plates crossed through Eagle Pass, crossed the border.
Now we're seeing at least some connection to our southern border.
The truck, as we now know, it's been reported, has passed over the Eagle Pass border crossing.
We know that the suspect drove a truck with a Texas license plate right into this crowd. It's unclear if this specific driver crossed through Eagle Pass, Texas, but the truck came from Eagle Pass, we're told.
The legal attaché office there in Mexico City trying to run down what happened there in Eagle Pass when the vehicle crossed the border.
This is a truck that our sources here to our reporters are telling us crossed the border through Eagle Pass, Texas.
We'll tell you that the FBI will retrace that route and go into every convenience store, every gas station along the route from Eagle Pass to New Orleans. These people, it's interesting, they came across the southern border apparently.
This is the truck that we believe came from Eagle Pass, Texas.
Some breaking news right now into our newsroom. I want to alert our viewers. Our sources now tell Fox that that truck from Eagle Pass, Texas, did not cross 2 days ago. It crossed on November 16th, and the identification of the driver that crossed the border does not appear to be the shooter.
So I made that video so I could count how many times someone on Fox said cross the border or Eagle Pass. That was 22 times. 22. Now, we're about to go through the whole timeline. That was over the course of an hour and 15 minutes. Some other people have said the first 2 hours, it's also acceptable. It was the first 2 hours. But hour and 15 minutes from the moment they said they made the wrong call to the retraction, 22 times. It was astonishing to watch. So how I got that, because I knew that Fox had screwed up. I didn't know exactly when. Nobody had posted it, at least not where I could see it. And because it was a holiday and people just weren't as tuned in, which I totally understand. Are you kidding? So I just started at the beginning and said, let's go at 6 a.m. and we'll start going through every single hour of Fox until we see this mistake. And what Fox did on January 1st, because this was a major news event, normally Fox would show pre-taped garbage. And that shows put together ahead of schedule, and it would be about the holiday. They'd be silly quizzes and games and stuff like that, trivia, viewer mail. That's what they do. But Fox, to its credit, turned on converted straight to Fox News Live, which is sort of an all-purpose breaking news program that they had going for pretty much the whole day. So here we go. Anatomy of a xenophobic smear. 2 days. This is 2 days. So we're going to start with Monday. Before the terrorist attack, Fox News was already laying track for an imagined criminal element that involved undocumented immigrants and New Year's Eve celebrations. So this is December 30th from Fox and Friends. And they had completely different hosts than normal because of the holiday. This is Will Kane. He's normally on Fox and Friends weekends.
New Year's Eve, Times Square. It's kind of interesting that this comes up at the same time. You have illegal immigration crime. You have particularly acute crime in New York City. And anyone of us who spent time in New York, if you had to kind of pinpoint an area of the city where you go, hey, here's where the crime, and here's where the crime most attributed to illegal immigration is, it's Times Square. Yeah. It's Times Square where I don't know how many people, tens of thousands, are going to pour in there on December 31st.
It's a scary number. I don't know, but.
So that second voice that you heard in that clip at the very end there was Katie Pavlich, who was also hosting that day. So according to reporting by the Bronx Daily from August of last year, the neighborhood with the highest crime rate in New York City is Hunts Point in the Bronx. Two other neighborhoods that were in the top three were Brownsville and Bedford-Stuyvesant, which are located in Brooklyn. And I've talked about this before on the podcast. The two boroughs of New York City that have higher crime rates are Brooklyn and the Bronx. Brooklyn first because it's a much larger borough, has a much bigger population, and the Bronx as well. So Times Square is located in Manhattan, which has the second lowest crime rate in New York City. Staten Island has the lowest crime rate, but it also has a much lower population density than the rest of the city. It's similar to a suburban area. It is part of New York City, but if you go there, trust me, you're like, is this New York City? It looks like Jersey, but it's Staten Island. It's Staten Island. I don't want to diss Staten Island. It's just a very low crime rate, but it's also very different than the rest of the city. The overall rate of crime in New York City also dropped last year. Now we're going to move on to Guy Benson, who was filling in as well. This is the same day, same episode.
When you have jurisdictions that are proudly, by definition, sanctuary cities, or even states in some cases, if you are not only an illegal immigrant, but someone who is violent or might be prone to crime, you're of course going to flock to a place like this.
So this is classic fear-mongering because they pulled this out of thin air. There's no indication that there'd be any sort of gang activity at the New Year's Eve ball drop in Times Square. And if you know anything about that event, there's just a ridiculous amount, a huge amount of law enforcement. There's all these precautions. People get searched. There's pens. You can't leave the pen. They don't kid around with this event at all. So this idea that like migrants would just show up and cause a problem is ridiculously far-fetched. But moving on, this is the next day. They're still doing it. So this is Joey Johnny Jones. He brought up the Venezuelan prison gang with Paul Murrow, who's a retired NYPD inspector. He's a regular on Fox. He's actually a little bit more reasonable than some of the people they have. And this is a segment about, again, the potential for criminal activity in Times Square for the holiday.
You hear this, acute threat of Tren de Aragua, but it's kind of this larger issue of how the city has handled illegal immigrants that have come to the city. Is this something that we should look at and say, hey, this is a really big threat for tonight's celebrations, or is it really something that just is here all the time?
So I can't play the full clip due to time, but Morrow basically answers immediately by downplaying the threat of this Venezuelan gang. And then Jones mentions that an unnamed source quoted in the New York Post, which is owned by the same company that owns Fox News, claimed that NYPD officers were more likely to be injured by migrant suspects. Now, this source was unnamed. And this is how Paul Murrow changed on a dime.
We wake up and Tom Homan comes in on 20 January and Donald Trump starts to do battle, and it's going to be a battle, a legalistic battle with the sanctuary cities and states. This kind of thing is going to go on because they're very aware of the fact that they have essentially a protected status.
So I want to add that there was no criminal event in Times Square on New Year's Eve involving undocumented immigrants or U.S. citizens. And I did see some experts talk about it, and they said the biggest problem people have when they go to Times Square traditionally is dealing with pickpockets. It's not going to the bathroom, because you can't go to the bathroom. Once you're in one of those pens, they don't let you out. So there's a lot of jokes about diapers and whatnot. Who cares? There was no crime event, none whatsoever. Went off without a hitch. So now we turn to January 1st, the day of the terrorist attack in New Orleans. And of course, it happened sort of in the early morning hours. And at first, Fox and Friends was sort of business as usual. And the terrorist attack was reduced to a quick kind of 30-second story. And I thought that there's no way this isn't going to completely blow up on this network. And I was right. And by the second hour of Fox and Friends, it was taking up most of the airtime. And by the third hour of Fox and Friends, it took up the entire program. They didn't even announce the weather. It was just 100% this story. And they weren't saying anything basically that anybody else in the news wasn't saying. It wasn't until 10:08 a.m. Eastern Standard Time on Fox News Live. So Chris Zwecker, a former assistant FBI director, brought up the possibility that the terrorist suspect might have illegally entered the United States. So this is the first time on January 1st that someone on Fox goes there, basically, and makes this assumption based on absolutely no evidence. Here we go.
Is there a danger of a copycat? Is there a danger of other co-conspirators? Which could be the case if this is international terrorism. We've had 4 years of open borders. We know that terrorist cells have infiltrated.
At the time of Zwecker's statement, very little was known about Shamsuddin Jabbar, the U.S. citizen who committed the attack. Now we move on to 10:47 a.m., also Fox News Live. Brian Lennes, one of the co-hosts of Fox News Live, was the first person on the network to make a false claim about the truck used in the attack. And here's the clip.
David Spunt. He and R. Griff Jenkins are able to report that the suspect drove a truck with a Texas license plate that came through Eagle Pass, Texas 2 days ago. David, what else do you know about this vehicle?
So we're hearing that the vehicle was traced to coming across from Mexico into the United States at Eagle Pass, Texas 2 days ago. To be clear, we don't 100% know that this man, and we do know the suspect is a man, was the person driving that crossed the border. That is unclear at this point. We just know that the actual license plate was picked up by a reader at a border crossing. This is per two federal law enforcement sources.
So the next clip is 2 minutes later. David Spunt brings up the immigration status of this suspect, which is kind of, again, ridiculous because they don't know anything.
And the other thing that's not entirely clear right now is the status, the immigration status of this driver.
Moving on to 11:05 a.m., David Spunt, same voice you just heard, read directly from a statement Donald J. Trump posted on Truth Social.
Have heard, though, from President-elect Trump, who's going to move in here in just a few weeks. He put out a statement that says, quote, "When I said the criminals coming in are far worse than the criminals we have in our country," that statement was constantly refuted by Democrats and the fake news media, but it turned out to be true. The crime rate in our country is at a level that nobody has ever seen before. Our hearts are with all of the innocent victims and their loved ones, including the brave officers of the New Orleans Police Department. The Trump administration will fully support the city of New Orleans as they investigate and recover from this pure act of evil.
For clarification purposes, Donald J. Trump said the crime rate in our country is at a level that no one has ever seen before, which is absolutely ridiculous. Since, number one, a terrorist attack is not exactly the same thing as just regular crime. I would not put them in the same category. A terrorist attack is its own thing. And crime rates across the country were much higher in the 1970s, peaking into the mid-1990s, that have dropped dramatically since. Now we move on to 11:55 a.m. after Fox hosts and guests repeated, again, as I played at the beginning, 22 times that the truck used in the terrorist attack recently crossed the U.S. southern border. Brian Lennis interrupted an interview with a new breaking news update.
So we get some breaking news right now into our newsroom. I want to alert our viewers. Our sources now tell Fox that that truck from Eagle Pass, Texas, did not cross 2 days ago. It crossed on November 16th, and the identification of the driver that crossed the border does not appear to be the shooter. We will get more clarification, we expect, Molly, in just 4 or 5 minutes.
So that's your fall out of your seat moment where Fox News actually corrects itself live on air. That is an incredibly rare event. I can say without hesitation, I could count on one hand how many times I've seen this happen in 3 solid years of watching a ridiculous amount of Fox News. Just a crazy, crazy amount of Fox News. It's just an incredibly rare event for anyone on Fox to correct Fox, especially with a glaring mistake like this. So investigators have since discovered that the suspect rented the truck using the car rental app Turo the day before he intentionally drove into a crowd near the French Quarter in New Orleans. And I wanted to add that because the relevance of the truck crossing the border in November played absolutely no role. That was completely useless information. We didn't need to know it. I also want to specify that throughout that hour and 15 minutes, they kept repeatedly saying that Griff Jenkins and David Spunt found this information, and they also kept repeatedly saying 2 unnamed sources within federal law enforcement, or 2 members of federal law enforcement who are unnamed. They just kept repeating those same phrases over and over and over again. I got some grief from people on social media because I called this a mistake. I still believe that it is a mistake, but regardless, I didn't have 2 solid sources that gave me evidence that Fox knowingly fabricated this detail. Since I did not have that, I'm not about to make a call. If I were to post something on social media that said, I know for a fact that Fox News lied about this detail, I would be just as bad as Fox News. So I was aggressive about pushing back against people who came at me very hostilely, I'll add, over that little detail. I am not a propagandist, and I refuse to make assumptions based on no evidence. I won't do it. Just, you have my word, I will not do it. I will go through hell and back not to create my own propaganda in some sort of misguided attempt to attack Fox. Now, I based the fact that I thought it was a mistake based on the full context of watching 6 hours of this. The fact that they corrected themselves on air, and this next clip is a doozy. It is basically what cemented my thoughts that this was a mistake on the part of Fox. I'm not letting Fox off the hook. I'm saying that they are sloppy and that they're biased, that they wanted so badly to have a story trashing undocumented immigrants, blaming immigration for this crime. They wanted to do it so badly, they didn't do due diligence, they didn't vet their sources, they didn't do enough of the homework to prove that this lead, this tip that they got was accurate, because it was inaccurate. Now this next clip, I'm telling you, this is the button. This is why I was like 100% this was a mistake. Here we go. This is David Spunt. This is from 5:03. Instead of showing the 5, which is the most popular program on Fox News, they were still showing Fox News Live, which I totally understand why. And this quote, it speaks for itself. David Spunt.
The former president said criminals coming in, meaning into our country, but to be clear, this suspect was born in the United States, the 42-year-old, and he is an Army veteran. The FBI is the lead agency in this investigation, going through the social media and any other accounts associated with this suspect. We also know that there's some FBI activity in Houston where this suspect was based. Separately, and there's no indication that this is related at any time to what happened in New Orleans, law enforcement officials are investigating a truck explosion in Las Vegas, what appeared to be a truck explosion outside the Trump International Hotel.
So let me give you some further context on why that, to me, was the smoking gun that Fox just screwed up here. I don't think it was an intentional, but because they were so sloppy and because they were so hack, they didn't do due diligence, their bias got in the way, and they went ahead and promoted a detail about the story that was just blatantly false. David Spunt was one of 2 reporters who was credited with finding this remarkable tip. And they kept using that phrase over and over again. Oh, this clip is remarkable. This is a remarkable clip. Isn't that remarkable reporting? And they kept saying their names. By Griff Jenkins and David Spunt, they've been working on this for hours. They've been working on this all morning. All right. Then they take David Spunt, the same journalist who's credited for finding this amazing tip, and they make him live on air correct Donald J. Trump. I don't think that's a coincidence that they made the journalist who screwed up openly defy a man who's known for trashing people on social media and causing all kinds of havoc because of it, correct Donald J. Trump's Truth Social post. After the first presidential debate, the only presidential debate Trump did with Kamala Harris, they were talking about maybe doing a second one on Fox, and Trump was calling in Fox and Friends, and he said live on air, well, if we do another one, I don't want it to be with Martha McCallum and the regular people. I want Jesse Waters. So, I mean, that's what he does. So I can't imagine anyone on Fox who wants to keep their job wants that man coming at them by name like that. And probably what happened is Trump wasn't actually watching TV at this time, or he missed it. And, you know, for all I know, David Spunt may have done that 5-6 times. I don't know, because I said I wasn't watching it 24/7. But that floored me, that they actually corrected Trump live on air. I was like, wow. I also suspect, and again, I don't know, I don't have evidence, I'm going to preface that first, that probably what happened is when they did this for an hour and 15 minutes and they start saying all of this false nonsense about Eagle Pass and the truck crossing the border, law enforcement, probably the FBI, called them up and said, knock it off, you're screwing up our investigation. Because this is a serious issue, and when you are like making stuff up or providing false evidence, it will screw up law enforcement. I don't know exactly what happened, but all of this is just completely bizarre for this network. So a lot of folks commented that this incident was very similar to another bad call that Fox made a while back at a border checkpoint between the U.S. and Canada at Niagara Falls, where there was a horrific car accident where a car basically exploded. And they had called it falsely that they said, oh, this is a terrorist attack. And they did so for a while before they corrected it. And in that case as well, they blamed a bad source. Well, part of your job as a journalist is to figure out if that source is legit. That is part of your job. You can't just run with something because you like, it agrees with you. And this is why I feel so strongly about this. And when people kept coming at me on Substack and Threads and Blue Sky with this, it wasn't a mistake, it was an intentional. And I'd say, I just got so fed up. I would say to people, prove it. Give me 2 sources. Make sure, preferably sources that can provide documentation in some form of paper trail via email, text message, or something, that this was a fabricated story. And then I will change what I wrote. So we're moving on to the next day on Fox and Friends. And again, even though you saw David Spunt pretty much humiliate himself and open himself up for the wrath of Donald J. Trump by admitting that, yes, this is a mistake. And oh, by the way, that Truth Social post is inaccurate. And I saw, again, repeated over and over and over again, U.S. citizen, U.S. military, U.S. citizen, U.S. military from Texas, U.S. citizen, U.S. military from Texas. They did correct themselves. The rest of the Fox crew could not help themselves, and they kept going back to this well of sort of imaginary undocumented immigrants. But in this case, Lawrence Jones brings up undocumented immigrants, brings up the southern border, then pivots oddly to pro-Palestinian protesters, which, okay, here we go. Again, this is from the morning after.
Especially when, Griffin, you've reported on the numbers that we know of people that are on the terror watch list of across the border. That doesn't even include the ones that are considered gotaways. We see the people as late as yesterday in the middle of the street with Hamas flags in the middle of the street protesting. There is an element of radical Islam that is pervasive in the country, and we saw that once the war broke out between Hamas and Israel. And I think when you're talking to all these officials now, they have allowed these people to protest while chanting radical Islamic rhetoric in the middle of the street. Should we be investigating those people?
So I have no doubt that the FBI or CIA, probably both, have infiltrated some of the pro-Palestinian protesters. I have zero doubt of that. I'm not saying it's a good thing. I'm not saying I agree with it. I just have no doubt that that has already happened, because that is what happens, especially when a protest have gone on for this long. And I'm sure there's some individuals involved who are, you know, way too extreme, far more extreme than your average protester. I'm not meaning to disparage people who advocate for Palestinians, but there's always an element pretty much in every protest of people that go too far with things. So I have no doubt that there's some infiltration that's already happened. This gets brought up later in the 5, and to her credit, and I was shocked by this, Judge Jeanine Pirro shot down the idea that saying something at a protest should be illegal, because I would agree with her wholeheartedly that the First Amendment protects a person's right to free speech, including speech that others don't like. So next up, same program, we have Tom Homan, the man that everyone loves to talk about in regards to the border. So he's the former deputy director of ICE and the man Trump has picked to be his next border czar. He also brought up the pro-Palestinian protesters and the southern border while discussing the terrorist attack in New Orleans.
And when you got, protesters walking down the streets in New York City carrying terrorist flags, chanting death to Israel and death to the United States, and nothing's being done about it. And when you got 16 terrorists have crossed this border and under Biden, I don't know how many, but someday we're going to find out. It's going to be a bad day for America.
I always find it alarming when members of law enforcement do not seem to understand the fundamentals of our Constitution. And that's a great example right there, because he says, and I'm going to quote him directly, protesters walking down the streets of New York City carrying terrorist flags, chanting death to Israel and death to United States, and nothing's been done about it. I hate to break it to you, Tom Homan, but you seem to lack understanding of how the First Amendment works. All of that behavior, carrying a terrorist flag, saying horrible things, is protected under the First Amendment, and there's nothing you can do about it. And hopefully, and I say this with all the gravity in the world, the First Amendment survives the Trump administration. With the way that they're messing with courts, that is a sacred thing to this country. But right now, as of the time of the airing of the recording of this podcast, the First Amendment protects anyone's right to say horrible things and to carry a horrible symbol that might offend a lot of people. And there's nothing you can do about it, Tom Homan. I've discussed this before on the podcast, but I'm going to repeat it for any newcomers who may not have heard me say it before. But inciting violence, saying death to America is not inciting violence. That is protected speech. Even if you don't agree, I don't agree with it, but it's protected speech. Inciting violence is, and it's this specific. I'm in a public sphere. I look at a specific individual, I point to that person and I say, hey, crowd, go hurt that person. or go kill that person. And I'm very specific about my target, and the threat is immediate. That is inciting violence. Similar to being in a crowded theater and screaming fire or screaming I see a bomb or something like that. Similar to going to an airport, joking about a bomb. That is not tolerated. That is not protected speech. Also not protected speech, just while we're on the subject, is saying, oh, by the way, I just made this flyer that says vote on Wednesday, not on Tuesday, if you have the last name that starts with, J through Z. Don't vote on Tuesday. They've run out of ballots. You got to come back Wednesday. That's also not protected speech, interestingly enough. So a right to vote is also protected specifically. It's not in the Constitution, but it's been adjudicated multiple times that gets a special carve out. You're not allowed to openly, knowingly mislead people about their right to vote in an effort to take their right to vote away from them. So moving on later in the day, we go on to The 5, the #1 show on the network. Now they're back to a normal format. They have their cast in, and they, of course, immediately start to talk about this. Now, Kennedy, she's a former VJ from MTV, just simply goes by the name Kennedy, no first name, starts it with an absolutely absurdly stupid comment, and I included it because it's so awful. Here we go.
And, some of this, it's difficult to wrap your head around, but it has exposed soft targets, which are softer than baby lotion, in Drake's words.
Why on earth is she talking about baby lotion with an event that's a terrorist attack where 14 people died? It's not funny. It's not appropriate. Also, she gets the quote wrong. I had to look this up because I was like, what is she talking about, baby lotion? So in 2015, a rapper, Meek Mill, referred to a song written by another rapper singer, Drake, as baby lotion soft. So Drake didn't say it. Meek Mill said it. And why are you talking about that when discussing a terrorist attack? So next up, we have our hero. She's not really the hero, but sort of the unofficial hero of Decoding Fox News, who is, and you know who I'm going to say, Jessica Tarloff, the only liberal on the program. She mentioned that the deceased suspect was a U.S. citizen. Here we go.
Two stories being told about this perpetrator. One that, people who took a moment to actually think about it and to get more information are telling, which is that this was a homegrown American terrorist. This is an American who was raised in Texas, who served in the United States military. And then there is another narrative that is being boosted by people who want to make a case about open borders, that this is someone who, flew through Eagle Pass, drove to New Orleans and tried to kill a bunch of people. That's obviously not what happened here.
So immediately after that statement, and I mean immediately after that statement, Kennedy brings up the southern border. What are we doing?
So tell me, what are your thoughts on the perpetrator? He ranted about going after his family, and then he does something like this. And then we're hearing about hundreds, maybe thousands of people associated with, groups from ISIS-K to Al-Shabaab in this country illegally, potentially gotaways we don't even know about. Radicalization you're talking about, as Jessica points out, this was an American citizen. But how much easier is it for someone to perpetrate acts like this if they've already been radicalized, if they have found a weakness at the southern border, and this is essentially a roadmap for them? I think that's what a lot of people are scared about.
So Kennedy, like Homan, like other people on Fox News, is now, again, obsessed with a potential terrorist attack in the future, something that hasn't happened yet, rather than focusing on a terrorist attack that just resulted in the death of 14 Americans. Like, what is wrong with you? Seriously, what is wrong with you? What actually happened is that a person born in this country who was part of the U.S. military for a set amount of time had some emotional damage, probably PTSD from his time in the service, also seemed to have, he may have had mental health problems. I don't know. He was on his third divorce, tens of thousands of dollars in debt, had emotional problems. People were concerned for him. He spiraled, got radicalized, and killed strangers because of it. That is a tragedy, an absolute tragedy. We don't need to focus on, well, what might happen in the future, because I'd rather talk about that. But that's exactly what they're doing on Fox. Now, normally these segments on the 5 are much more ordered, but this one was kind of chaotic. So we're going to go back to Jessica Tarloff, where she's going to discuss the southern border.
You're telling me that in the last year, where we've gotten out over 700,000 people, which is the most that we have deported since the year 2010, that we have the lowest number of border crossings, that we have record seizures of drugs that are supposed to be coming across the border, that this is a wide open border.
So then why did Biden lose if he's so great?
It was too little too late in addressing this problem. But when you say I'm embarrassed,
that's the truth.
When people, great, I'm glad we can agree on something. But when you say I'm embarrassed watching Joe Biden, I'm not embarrassed seeing someone stand up there and saying, let's wait for some facts here. Because Donald Trump went out there and he said,
Is that what he said? I couldn't understand.
No, he assured
you guys
Americans
know exactly
all was
what he
well.
said. No, listen to all of the comments that he made and the statements which said we need to make sure that we have the right facts. And the right facts were that the guy in New Orleans was an American. He wasn't an illegal
Nobody's
crossing.
saying he wasn't.
That's not true. That's not true. There have been Republicans who have been on TV today talking about how this is an open border.
I'll call them myself.
You call them. That it's an open border
Not
problem.
mutually exclusive. That's not a mutually exclusive problem. You can have someone who's homegrown,
But you know
radicalized,
what they're trying to do?
and
They're
you can
trying
also
to
have
conflate
terrorists.
it. They're
who
trying
know
to
that we
make
have
it out to
the
be
southern border.
that it is a demonization
Both things can happen at the same time.
undocumented people. That's what it was supposed to be.
Yeah,
That's
it
why
is
he
a
talked about it going
demonization.
to.
And we
but
haven't
these aren't
even-
undocumented people. These are Americans.
75% of the arrests in New York City are illegals. Let's stop playing games.
Move the goalposts. Move it as far as you want.
You're
Sugar
telling me-
Bowl wide. Whatever.
So I have to correct Judge Jeanine Pirro. I know you're shocked by that. We're all shocked by that. How Judge Jeanine Pirro got something wrong? Never. Okay. She just shouted out very dramatically, and nobody called her on it, because I think Jessica Charloff was probably holding on for dear life. It gets worse for her, but she's a trooper. She's amazing. But Judge Jeanine Pirro screamed, but 75% of the arrests in New York City are illegals. This is incorrect. 4 months ago, police sources told the New York Post, so that is an unnamed police source, that as many as 75% of people arrested in Midtown Manhattan for crimes such as assault, robbery, and domestic violence are immigrants. All right, so let's look at that, shall we? Midtown Manhattan is one tiny section of New York City. We've been through this before. The borough system. We go Manhattan, the Bronx, Queens, Brooklyn, Staten Island. 8.3 million people. One neighborhood in Manhattan is not New York City. Second, we're dealing with an anonymous source from the police that just makes a blanket statement like that. We have no data to support it. We have nothing to verify it. I would see all of that as a little suspect. But anyway, moving on. And the New York Post is owned by the same company that owned Fox, and the New York Post is garbage. I'll say that. I'm saying that. New York Post is garbage. So later during the same discussion, Johnny Jones goes back to this same well of what about migrants? Here we go.
When I went through EOD school, 2007-8, we were briefed on the fact that we know there are people in this country that were sent here from other places that want to do us harm and are just trying to get a hold of material to do it. And that was part of our job, to make sure they couldn't. So this is not a new thing. This is a thing that our government should always have their eye on. And I don't know that they didn't, but God Almighty, maybe spend less time banning Pete Hegseth from guarding the inauguration in 2020 and spend more time looking for people who have absolutely gotten radicalized or at least gone crazy while on the DOD payroll.
Yeah.
And it's, the shooter at Fort Hood. Learn your lesson once, not twice. I'm very upset about this. Both of these people are service members.
So a brief interjection here. When he says both of these people, he's referring to a suicide committed on the same day by an active duty service member who used fireworks and explosive materials to set fire to a Tesla Cybertruck outside of the Trump Hotel in Las Vegas, Nevada. So there were two incidents. They thought they were related. For a minute, they weren't. One person was an active duty service member who just committed suicide and wanted to go out in a big spectacle. They both happened to rent their cars from Turo. So there were both cars were electrics. There were some odd similarities, but the FBI has determined that they were not related events. And the person who destroyed the Tesla Cybertruck was a Trump supporter who actually admired Trump and Elon Musk. Very strange event, but that's what he was referring to. This is the rest of his statement.
They're supposed to be my brothers, and they're killing the people that I would die for. And we should have a government that can sniff that out, not that spends its time prosecuting people that didn't want to get a vaccine.
Now, although there was a lot of crazy in his comment, because he brought up Pete Hegseth and he repeated the same sort of theme of, well, what if somebody crosses our southern border, and what if in the future somebody who crossed our southern border is set out to harm. People are coming into our country in order to commit terrorism. All of that. With all of that, he does have a kernel of truth here. And Johnny Jones is one of the few people on Fox News that does have some humanity still in him. I don't agree with probably 95% of his politics, but every now and then he drops a little bit of truth. And he had it right there at the end. Johnny Jones has lost both of his legs in Afghanistan when he was serving our country. And he is active in a number of charities, and I believe he runs part of a charity that helps disabled veterans. And he, I think, is completely right in that veterans, we're not doing enough for these people. We're not giving them the right support, the right care, because this is sadly a pattern. This has happened before, and we'll discuss that a little bit later. Now, 99.99% of veterans are never going to do anything like this, but it has happened before, as he mentioned, and I'll mention a couple later in the podcast. But that's why I wanted to include that clip, because I was like, he's actually right on that part, on the we got to do more for veterans. We've got to do more for veterans, because this is just an absolute tragedy. So we're going to move on to the Ingram angle later that day. We're almost done with these clips. This is Jonathan Fahey, the former director of the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement during Trump's first term. What he says, again, is outrageous. So here we go.
On Fox and Joe Biden's statement last night, they went out of their way to say American citizen. He was an American citizen in the military, almost like American citizen's a pejorative term in their view. But what they're really showing is their defensiveness, because they know what they've been doing for the last 4 years, which is just opening our border to anyone that wants to come in here. And as you know, and people that watch Fox, that this administration let 99 people on the terrorist watch list that were stopped by Border Patrol and still let into the country, and they've never told us what happened to them. They just allude to the fact that they've dealt with it, but we don't know. But it's really the gotaways, and this administration has done nothing to suggest that they're taking this issue nearly as seriously as they should be.
So they weren't calling the terrorist suspect an American citizen as a pejorative. They were calling him an American citizen because he was an American citizen. I know this doesn't line up with your worldview. It doesn't line up with what you want to have happened. But that's what happened. Somebody born in this country, raised in this country, served for this country, went down a very dark path and took the lives of 14 people in a horrific way. And I hate to break it to you, but that happens in this country. It's happened before. And that's a tragedy for everyone involved. So it's just so incredibly sad. And for him to say that, I just went, are you out? What did you just say? People aren't saying that as an insult to this country. They're saying it because it's reality. And you're going to have to wake up to the reality that most of the terrorism that happens in the United States is done by people who were born here. Just flat out. That is the truth. That's not debatable. I'm getting worked up. So the next one, the last one, and this is a doozy. And it's, again, Jessica Tarlov trying desperately. And I have some stuff at the end here that I can't wait to talk about. But here we go. This is the next day on the 5 again. And Jessica Tarlov bravely tries to point out that more domestic terrorism is done in the name of white supremacy than a twisted version of Islam. She is correct. But boy, they're not going to let her say it. Here we go.
But the reason that President Biden and the administration and Christopher Wray, who was a Trump appointee, have been talking about the threat of right-wingers and far right-wing supremacy, whatever you want to call it, is because that's what the numbers bear out. And we put up all those numbers about how many people had been killed by jihadists. But it's not as many as those who have been killed by white supremacists. So the New America Foundation has done a breakdown in terrorist attacks since 9/11. It goes through 2023. We have to add the 2024 numbers once they're available. But you have 134 killed by far right-wingers, 107 killed by jihadists, 17 killed by misogynists or incels, 13 killed by black separatists or nationalists, and 1 killed by
killed by gang members.
Yeah.
I mean, that's got to be on the list.
Okay,
Let's put
how many killed by illegals. You know, let's add to the list.
Those are
I wonder how many of those killed by white supremacists were killed in prison.
Yeah.
Classic bullying technique in a discussion. None of those would be considered terrorism. Gang violence is not terrorism. Killing somebody in prison is not terrorism. Domestic violence is not terrorism. Terrorism is a very specific thing, and they're just flooding the zone with nonsense to throw Tarloff off her game. She keeps going. Here we go.
Well, that's like suicide. I mean, because oftentimes they.
How many people fell off an ice cream truck?
You brought the numbers up. I mean, you're countering the numbers that are very obvious.
No, well, we're not.
From
First
terrorist
of all,
attacks.
Yes, they have their definition of a terrorist attack. They have the ideologies behind these terror attacks. I am not here to minimize any. You do know? Great. We'll tell the rest of the table.
I don't think you're minimizing it, but
I'm just saying that the numbers don't. But it does.
I don't think the argument holds.
I think the numbers are accurate.
Well, what numbers do you
first
have
of all,
you're
talking about post 9/11.
Right.
I mean,
Yeah,
the
what do you
numbers
wanna
that
talk
we
about? You
have
wanna go back
is,
to World
first
War
of all, no, is 2015 in terms of ISIS. These are the only numbers that we have collected. You want to go back to 2011? We can go back to that number.
Well, I want to go
but
back
you're
to
saying that the white supremacists have killed more people than ISIS.
In
Where?
in America, we're talking about protecting
What
the
is a
homeland.
white supremacist?
It's
Is it a white
it's
guy who
Dylan
kills
Roof.
his wife?
No, it is Dylan Roof walking into the Emmanuel
That's a
AME
white
Church.
supremacist.
It's someone walking into the Tree of Life synagogue. It is someone walking into a Walmart looking for Latinos to shoot up. That's what I'm talking about when we're talking about white supremacists.
Okay.
So when Jessica Tarloff managed to get to Dylan Roof, the Tree of Life synagogue, and the El Paso shootings, all of which were motivated by white supremacy, I was cheering in my own way in my tiny apartment because she is correct. And to read a quick statement from the source, New America, which she cited, here we are. Since 9/11, jihadists have killed 107 people inside the United States. The death toll is similar to that from far-right terrorism, consisting of anti-government militia, white supremacist, and anti-abortion violence, which has killed 134 people. The United States has also seen attacks in recent years inspired by black separatist, nationalist ideology, and ideological misogyny. That's hatred of women, of course. Individuals motivated by these ideologies have killed 13 and 17 people respectively, and those with far left views have killed one person. America's terrorism problem today is homegrown and is not the providence of any one group or ideological perspective. So this is the one time in particular that I wish I was on the set of The Five to assist Tarloff, as I have a background researching the Proud Boys and the history of white supremacy in the United States. One of the most lethal domestic terrorist attacks in U.S. history, now this happened before 9/11, so that's why it wasn't mentioned, was carried out by Timothy McVeigh, a U.S. citizen and military veteran. McVeigh also harbored white supremacist beliefs, which did not get enough coverage in the press, but he most assuredly did, I can confirm. In 1995, McVeigh killed 168 people, including 19 children, when he detonated a homemade bomb outside of a federal office building in Oklahoma City. Another lesser-known white supremacist group from the mid-1980s, known as The Order, planned an armed insurrection against the federal government. Members of the group engaged in counterfeiting, held up several banks, armored cars, and detonated bombs in multiple buildings, including a synagogue. Members of the Order murdered Alan Berg, a Jewish radio host, outside his home in Denver, Colorado, along with one of its own members they falsely believed was cooperating with law enforcement. Both McVeigh and The Order were inspired by The Turner Diaries, a dystopian novel written by neo-Nazi William Luther Pierce. According to the International Center for Counterterrorism, the book has inspired more than 200 murders. If you would like to learn more about this subject, this is from the newsletter I'm reading directly. Retro Report. This is a nonprofit that I worked at as an intern while I was in grad school, and this is the exact project I worked on. Created a series of short films about the history of extremism in the U.S. They are short, informative films that are highly accurate. I also want to say very quickly, there is a slightly fictionalized account of The Order. It's a film that you can get online. I don't know if it's in theaters. It features Jude Law. They changed quite a bit in the story. They condensed characters. They condensed plot points. They made the lead FBI character in the movie far more dramatic than he was in real life. The real guy was very calm, cool, collected, and controlled. However, the story is absolutely over the top. You almost can't believe the order was real, but they very much were. And the order is part of this whole network of violent white supremacists that go back decades. And they're all connected. There's some overlap with anti-government extremism. We saw some of this at January 6th, which is so disturbing that Trump is probably going to pardon these people. Oh, I could talk so much about this subject. But yes, we have a problem with white supremacy. Biden wasn't making it up. The intelligence community in our country wasn't making it up, as much as Fox would love to deny reality, as usual. So anyway, I concluded a link to the films that Retro Report made. I'm not in them or anything. I just literally read books and looked up a lot of stuff online for them, including like locations where actual crimes were committed and shootouts were committed with the FBI and all this crazy stuff. Read a lot of disturbing things. So I did actually cover PBS. Fox did have other stories, but I'm telling you, they were not really that interesting. It was just a lot of fluff because they were expecting a slow news week like I think most of the world was. But that's not how news works. So next up, we have stories Fox News ignored. Every week, I compare the hours I've watched on Fox News to 5 hours of the PBS NewsHour. The following list are stories that PBS covered that Fox News did not. Some of these headlines are copied directly from PBS. Hyperlinks to the full story are included. I'm just full disclosure, because I'm covering PBS, these are PBS's stories, I'm using PBS's words. I kind of made a decision over the break to do more of that since it makes more sense, because I'm not really reporting on these stories, I'm reporting on what PBS reported on. If that it's weird, but there's a difference. So here we go. Updates for the war in Ukraine. President Joe Biden committed to an additional $2.5 billion for weapons to Ukraine. The package includes $1.25 billion in presidential drawdown authority, which allows the military to pull existing stock to get weapons to the battlefield more quickly. Russia and Ukraine participated in another prisoner swap, where each country exchanged 300 captors. The deal was brokered with help from the United Arab Emirates. The updates in the Israel-Hamas war. On Wednesday, PBS reported that at least a dozen Palestinians were killed overnight due to Israeli airstrikes. On Thursday, PBS reported that 40 people were killed in Gaza from an Israeli airstrikes, and on Friday, the network reported another 30 casualties. The UN Human Rights Office said Israel's operation in Gaza have pushed the healthcare system to the brink of total collapse and may be a violation of international law. Israel accuses Hamas of integrating into hospitals and using staff as shields to attack Israel. In Afghanistan, the Taliban said it will shut down every NGO that employs women. The extremist group said its decision to bar women from working because they didn't wear the Islamic headscarf correctly. The number of murders in the U.S. is declining at a rapid pace. While crime was a central focus of the election, with President-elect Trump alleging it was out of control in many cities, other crimes also saw declines. Robert Brooks, an inmate in a New York State prison, was brutally beaten by more than a dozen corrections officers. Activists say it's part of a larger culture of violence within the correctional system. A military appeals court has ruled against Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin's effort to throw out the plea deals reached for Khalid Sheikh Mohammed and 2 other defendants in the 9/11 attacks, a U.S. official said. And that's a plea deal that they made at Guantanamo to basically get life in prison instead of the death penalty, for clarification. It's been nearly 2 months since Election Day, but control of a seat on the North Carolina State Supreme Court is being held up in the courts. The trailing candidate, Jefferson Griffin, a Republican, is asking for more than 60,000 votes to be invalidated. In South Korea, authorities are considering their next steps after failing to detain impeached President Yoon Suk-yeol. Yoon was repeatedly resisted attempts by investigators to question him over his declaration of martial law last month, which they say could amount to rebellion. A year after a panel blew out of Boeing 737 MAX during a flight, the nation's top aviation regulator says that the company needs a fundamental cultural shift to put safety and quality above profits. President Biden blocked the sale of U.S. steel to a Japanese company, Nippon Steel, citing national security concerns. You'd think Fox would have mentioned that, because they've been screaming about that for weeks. They didn't mention it. They just kept saying that Biden was going to let it happen. So just wanted to throw that out there. The U.S. Surgeon General, Vivek Murthy, issued an advisory about the cancer risks of consuming alcohol. Murthy said that alcohol is a leading cause of cancer, a risk that should be clearly labeled on drinks Americans consume. Linda Lavin, an actress of stage and screen, has died at the age of 87. Lavin began her performing career when she was only 5 years old. She worked on Broadway and won a Tony Award for her role in Broadway Bound. She is best known for her starring role in the popular sitcom Alice, about a waitress who raised her son as a single mother. Harry Chandler, a Navy medic who helped pull injured soldiers from the oily waters of Pearl Harbor after the 1941 Japanese attack on the naval base, has died. He was 103. With Chandler's death, only 15 Pearl Harbor military personnel survivors are still living. Agnes Keleti, a Holocaust survivor and the oldest living Olympic medalist, has died. Born in Budapest in 1921, her life as an aspiring young gymnast was upended by World War II. She was forced out of the sport for being Jewish and also into hiding under a new name. After the war, she returned to gymnastics and went on to win 10 Olympic medals, 5 of them gold. She retired to Israel, where she helped coach gymnastics. So by the numbers, these are the top 5 topics on Fox compared to the 5 top topics on PBS. Here we go. Here we're starting with Fox. 44% the terrorist attack in New Orleans. 6% Biden bashing, because they always find a way. 5% was the Tesla Cybertruck explosion. 4% is a new category I'm simply calling Trump worship. And 3% was they just aired without. It was just a live feed of Biden giving out the Medal of Honor to various recipients in the White House. So next up, PBS top 5 topics from last week. Terrorist attack in New Orleans, 13%. Jimmy Carter legacy, 10%. Israel-Hamas war, 6%. Vote on the House Speaker. It was also mentioned on Fox, but it didn't make the top 5. On PBS, it was 5%. And 4% was sort of an evergreen story about the mental health crisis for new mothers. It was not a topical story, which was why it wasn't in the list. It was definitely an evergreen segment. So Fox News, words used for the week ending January 5th, 2025. Trump, 393. New Year, 238. Biden, 214. Terrorist, 179. Border, 130. ISIS, 102. Crime, 69. Illegal, 37. Kamala, 37. Migrant, 33. Eagle Pass, 28. So they said it 28 times total. Israel, 12. Economy, watch how these drop way off. Economy, 11. Islam, 10. Inflation, 6. China, 3. Ukraine, 3. And AOC did not make the list this week at 0. So that's the podcast. And yes, it was a very emotional podcast for me. I was getting very worked up because this was just such a tragic event. And then to have Fox just make it so much worse by pushing false information. And then even after they corrected the false information, both guests and hosts alike just kept insinuating that it was somehow related to immigration when it wasn't. So very disappointing, but I will continue to fight back against this monster. Fear not. I wanted to do this very quickly. I recorded this at the beginning, but I decided it would go better at the end of the podcast due to the tone of this episode. I just didn't think it was appropriate to put this at the beginning. So this is a list of people who bought stuff. I just use first names for privacy reasons, but I wanted to acknowledge these folks for buying stuff off of the Amazon wish list for the Decoding Fox News project. And there are a few items left on it. 2 of them are expensive. There's not much else left because all of the inexpensive items, which is mostly cat treats, were purchased by amazing human beings. And my cats love the cat treats. You have no idea. Anything with Truru, they go nuts for Truru, like most cats. So here's the list. Here we go. Thank you so much, everybody who bought something from the Decoding Fox News Amazon gift list, I should say. I don't make a lot of money doing this. It's still, the whole project is still sort of in its startup phase. It's getting better. So I do ask for help sometimes, and people like to give my cats gifts. So it's a lot of cat treats that I'm about to read off, but they love them and they get excited. I will just say briefly, I opened the door right after I announced the Amazon wish list, I opened the door to my tiny apartment, and there were these little tiny packages. Almost all of them got delivered on the same day, and I just started laughing because they knew it was all cat treats, and it was almost all cat treats. So thank you so much. There's 2 expensive items still left on that list, and almost everything else has been purchased. I think there's a couple other inexpensive items, so if you want to check it out, if you're super generous, it's great. If not, it's no worries. It basically helps me run this little tiny micro-budget media project. So let's start with the gifts. I just want to give everybody a thank you. Only use first names for privacy reasons. So Wignez is how this person wrote their name. Got some cat treats. Thank you so much. GT bought a hard drive, which is amazing. You have no idea. I put everything old school hard drive because I don't trust clouds. I have been threatened with hacking before by right-wingers, so I'm very careful. Jennifer bought some cat treats. Also, Matthew, cat treats. Mikala has bought numerous things, including cat treats. Thank you so much. Multiple times. No name. Sadly, there was no name on this one. Pens. Christine, cat treats. Somebody got me this hysterical spreadsheet mug. That's Tia. Thank you so much. Cat treats from an admirer. Matthew again on cat treats. Cat treats and a cat mug. That is from Chris. Katria, I hope I'm saying your name right. Ink, also very needed. Thank you so much. Michaela again, treats. I'm just literally going through a stack of these. Catherine, cat toys. Thank you. And he played with them immediately. Thor jumped on that thing immediately. That was amazing. And then more cat treats from Kat. If I didn't read out your gift and you sent one, it may have been because Amazon doesn't always put the little gift receipts in there, which is terrible of that company. The company's kind of awful for so many reasons, but I use Amazon wishlist for various cat charities that I help out because I'm a cat lady. So I have mixed feelings about it because it does make it really easy to help out a charity, but who need things like immediately, like food, a cat food or cat litter. So very quickly, if you'd like to see more of my work, you can find me on Twitter, also known as X, Threads, Blue Sky, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, although not as much on TikTok. And I think I got them all. I'm really tired right now. I always get really tired at the end because I am tired. But anyway, if you'd like to become a paid subscriber or paid supporter for Decoding Fox News, I could always use you. You can go to Substack for Decoding Fox News, Patreon for Decoding Fox News, and become a paid subscriber. All paid subscribers get exclusive content. This week it was the full version of the numbers kind of overview for the year. I have another one coming that's going to be graph fun. And then hopefully I'm trying to get a bonus episode in this week that's kind of the best of media clips because I wanted to make that separate because reading numbers off in a podcast isn't very dynamic, doesn't really work. So, and graphics don't work at all because they're visual. So I'm separating them this year, trying it that way. So that's about it. Thank you so much for supporting Decoding Fox News. Thor, my little tiny tuxedo cat, is on the desk staring at me right now, wondering when I'm going to shut up and feed him. He always wants to be fed. It's the middle of the night. He wants to be fed. But anyway, thank you so much for listening. I will see you at the next podcast.
Thank you all for coming to my one-woman show. It's nice to meet you.
Resolute Square.